Can you guys hear me? All right. Are we here? Is anyone here? Let's see. So I'm trying to see. It's also shaming me, telling me that that I don't have something's wrong with Twitch. Says we're connected. And I can't figure out why. Oh, there we go. Okay. This says we've successfully connected. Let's see. Let's see if I can tell it what category I am on Twitch. Okay. Okay. Welcome. Hey, guys. Good to be back. See, you got folks from Oklahoma, the UK. Awesome. I know it's been a minute, guys. I've just been incredibly busy, and I haven't publicly disclosed what I've been busy with, but you guys on Combat Vet News know. America leaders building a ballroom. That's like 2 news cycles ago, man. That's so long ago. No, thank you guys. Thank you guys for joining. So yeah. You guys know technical difficulties are just a recurrent theme in this channel, especially when it comes to streaming. But, you know, I'm committed. I'm committed to figuring it out, you know? And I'm also committed. Let me see if I can pop out. Wait. I'm trying to get it. I want to be able to see all of the chats. And I know there's some way to do it, like where it does multiple chats. I think it's in Stream Elements. It's called multi-chat. And it lets me see, because I know you guys are watching on Twitter. And so I want to make sure you guys are, well, Twitter and also Twitch. I want you guys to feel included, you know? Oh, Denmark. Good to see you guys. You guys, yeah, former ally. Yeah, that's kind of how it feels. Yeah, it's a little hard. People really just are out here. There we go. There's multi-chat. Let's see. Yeah, Dennis Dedderow. I actually really like Dennis. I think he's really cool. But I agree. I agree with your statement that, you know, but it's not like his fault. He's a civilian, you know. He's gonna bring a civilian perspective to things. And don't get me wrong, civilian aviation, huge, but you know, civilian aviation is never been less relevant to the battlefield. There's so little aviation. Okay, interesting. So multi-chat's here, but I don't actually see it. So that's not that helpful. Maybe not. Maybe the multi-chat's just not working. Maybe that's why it's not on here. What can you show me YouTube chat? Waiting for your stream to go live. Oh, there it is. Okay. All right. So it's I see YouTube chat. Let's see if I can tell it to be like, hey, do multi-chat. All right, give me the multi-chat. And I want to just put it in right there. Okay. Interesting. Multi-chat not displaying. I'm fascinated by this, guys. Finland and France, dude. I love all you Europeans. My parents watch you now and Jake on YouTube instead of paying for cable. Dude, thank you. I appreciate that. I don't know if well, you know what? Cable's really expensive. I'm happy solely that your parents are saving. It's like $80 now, more. I mean, in the US, it can be up to like 120, $125. It's so expensive. It is so expensive. Okay. All right. I see that Twitch is twitching, as they say, or I don't know if that's what they say, but I see that I'm on Twitch, or that I have the Twitch chat. But am I actually live
for the whole family, so we hope to see you then.
That's
but
a
for
whole
now, we'd like
different
to say...
question. Oh, there I am. Okay. All right. Cool. Cool, but it's okay. Interesting. Well, you know, we're doing our best out here. We're doing our best, even though it is what it is. It is what it is. Colorado, you should be at work. It's Friday. It's Friday at 11. It's right for you. 11. Should we talk about some stories? I mean, so you guys, we'll let people kind of pop in, right? Basically, you guys know kind of the MO, right? The MO is simple. You have a burning question, drop a super chat. You can also, by the way, we've instituted it now, where if you want to become a member at combatvetnews.com, get access to like all the uncensored combat footage and going back literally to the start of the war. It's a huge archive. If you're looking for that membership, plus you get the Q&As and stuff, you can just become a lieutenant tier on YouTube, and we will just get you a login to Combat Vet News on the website, right? So you can hit membership, and I think YouTube now does like the gifted membership, so you can like gift people memberships. So that's an option, right? And if you like get a membership or gift a membership and drop a question in there, you'll jump to the front of the line for getting it answered. Yeah, Kerry Benford. I think Putin trolled Zelenskyy when he took Seversk, Pokrovsk. You mean Mirnohad? Come on, man. Translate Russian to English better. Vovchansk and Kupiansk. Well, I got bad news for you. Vovchansk, Kupiansk, Pokrovsk, Mirnohad. None of them are under full Russian control. So, LOL, LOL. Okay. Do we want to cover some stories? Right? Let's do it. Let's talk about some stuff. Let me pull up the first one I think is most interesting. All right. Let's wait. Let me see here. Russian troops. Oh, see, I'm still out of sorts. Still out of sorts. Let's see if I can actually correctly identify. Okay. Story is not about Russian troops. Ray Peter, enjoy watching you develop into a pro at YouTube. I am definitely a lot of things. Boy, am I not a pro at YouTube. Okay. All right, let's try this one more time. Ukrainian forces have booted the Russians out of Kupiansk, and Zelenskyy is actually doing a bit of trolling in the process. Just why are the Ukrainians pushing so hard in the north, and why is it important that Russia not let the Ukrainians win in the north's biggest city? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so really a fascinating story here is right here, taking place in the western side of Kupiansk. Now, I want to point out here, this has been a Russian advance on the western bank of the Oskil River. And to zoom out a little bit, right here, this is in the relatively quiet kind of northern sector of the front lines, right? Russian forces have been active fighting in places like Volchansk, right? Moving towards Kharkiv, certainly. But there's also been considerable fighting in the generally considered like the Izum direction, but more accurately thought of as like Kupiansk. And in Kupiansk here, you can see that Russian forces have been trying to commit to what they call an encirclement. It's a little weird, honestly. But for context, the Russians have come out and claimed as of November that Russian forces had literally captured Kupiansk in the Kharkiv region, which is an important logistics hub for this larger northeastern area, right? Gerasimov literally briefed it on TV to Vladimir Putin. And this is a huge problem, actually, for Putin and the Kremlin, because their credibility with the Russian public is extremely important to Putin staying in power, right? Putin's a strong man, so the only thing he offers his people is strength, especially now that the war economy is faltering. The Russians have to at least believe that they're winning. And so Gerasimov went on TV and told the Russian public and told Putin that Ukrainian forces were being booted out of Kupiansk, this pretty critical city. There's a problem. As you may note from this map, that even this is not actually control of the city. It says that Kupiansk, at least western Kupiansk, is contested. You can see eastern Kupiansk securely under Ukrainian control. Now, this would be a problem because, again, if Russian forces can take this roadway, Ukrainian forces in this half of the city are going to have a somewhat harder time getting resupplied. You could see, again, that Kupiansk Vuzovli is still pretty accessible, right? Ukrainians can still cross here and just work their supplies up north, but logistics gets harder and harder the more this goes on. Now, so you can see the Russian strategy. Cross the Oskil in the north, right? And then push down these forested areas here, get into the city, and then take block by block by block. And that has been largely the Russian strategy here to, again, seize. In the Russian mind, they decided, listen, in lieu of actually seizing the whole of the city, they're like, let's just try to get our troops into the city center, raise our flag in the city center. That's been a common Russian MO, to say they've taken a city when they can take the centralmost point in the city, or like a city hall or something, which, as we know, in this war, seizing a city hall is not the same thing as having taken the city, right? You can hold on to a city block by block, and it takes some time before it's seized. However, the Ukrainians realize that this is both a Russian strategic and tactical vulnerability, because, as we pointed out, in a Soviet-style system with an autocrat, if they say they've taken Kupiansk, they must ensure that is true, or if they can't do that, it needs to become true as fast as possible. That's why you see, instead of actually taking the more vulnerable part of the city, the eastern half, which is literally adjacent to Russian forces, they literally went all the way around and launched this by Ukraine war standards lightning advance into Kupiansk, right? Spearing straight down the Oskil and just making it into the center of town. Seems like a good strategy, right? They can at least raise the flag in the center of Kupiansk, claim victory, say, listen, guys, we got it, we did it. And they say, well, the Russian combat forces is clearly superior. We're taking city after city. But the Ukrainians have also found that this is a vulnerability. The reason it's a vulnerability is because the Russians have to ensure this is true, which means that they need to put a disproportionate amount of their combat power into ensuring this is true. And if they encounter resistance, their only option is never to back out, to reevaluate, to decide the juice isn't worth the squeeze. None of those things are an option for the Russians. They've already committed to taking it, and they've publicly committed to taking it. And so that means that they will expend any price to do so. Well, if there's one thing your insurance company knows, right, it's that if you say, I'll pay anything to get a life-saving cancer drug, the insurance companies are going to take you up on that offer, and they'll charge you $100,000, $200,000 for a drug that they can make by the gallon. Well, the Ukrainians are following the same strategy. The Russians have said, listen, we've got to take Kupiansk at any price. And so they say, bet. Now, as you can see, Russia made it to the city center, raised their little flag, said, guys, we did it. And then the Ukrainians, particularly the Khartia brigade, counterattacked, driving these guys out of Mirny, out of Radivka, and slicing them off. You can see that some poor Russian saps are now trapped inside Kupiansk in a couple of buildings and are facing annihilation. And you can see the Ukrainians take advantage of the Oskil River and the muddy conditions to just simply cut the Russians off and annihilate them. This is actually pretty significant. This is one of the largest single instance counter-offensive actions that we've seen from the Ukrainian forces. You can see, and it's taken place probably over a week, but you can see it's up to 8 kilometers, 7 kilometers of retaken territory. That's a lot by this war standards. And more importantly, Zelenskyy went out and did a little trolling. That's right. He actually went to Kupiansk, stood in front of the destroyed sign saying, welcome to Kupiansk, and took a selfie. In fact, he took a selfie and even sent a video message, right? Literally, I think this is actually kind of great that there's clearly a cameraman filming in HD, and he's clearly broadcasting on his selfie. So he literally is like, let me get some video of me taking a selfie here, right? Sending a message being like, yo, we're here. There's Kupiansk. And this is a huge troll, by the way. You can see that they're so confident that he's outside, by the way, of the drone netting. No, I don't think this is in downtown Kupiansk, right? This is the welcome to Kupiansk sign. But you have to remember, the range of Russian drones is supposed to be, I mean, it's not unheard of for them to go 20 kilometers. So the idea that he's hanging out here implies that there isn't a Russian drone within 20 kilometers of this, which is pretty bad news. And you can see also they have, right, the anti-drone netting here. They've clearly got, you know, fully armored troops escorting him. But still, the fact that this has been seized, that the Ukrainians control this to this extent, is a big humiliation for poor Russia. Not poor Russia, but reportedly, this inflicted both 1,000 casualties, and it was done by the National Guard Ukrainian Khartia Brigade. And I'm going to actually use this opportunity to mention that we have a fundraiser where we are supporting the Khartia Brigade. As you can see, boom, and the link's in the description. You should check it out. But we've partnered with UAO, a U.S. registered 501c3. It's a charitable organization. So if you donate, it's tax deductible, and it's December. Save on your taxes. We're helping out a bunch of brigades, helping them get the stuff they need, right? 3rd Assault, 54th, 7th, Liu, 73rd. And you can follow UAO on Twitter. They support Khartia a lot. But these guys are taking the fight to the Russians, obviously, in all directions. And not only are we getting these guys the gear they need for the winter today, EcoFlows, power banks, Mavics, but also we're helping their R&D labs who are finalizing, modifying some of their key technology like ground drones and getting them ready for the battlefield. And again, there's a 15 ground drone package that is really ready for prime time. They just need a couple more parts to get ready. And so that's what this fundraiser is doing. Obviously, you guys can get access to patches from the units. Thanks to guys like Eric, throwing up €52, Alexander, 91 Australian dollars, and Francois Mercure, 310 Canadian dollars. Seeing the international contributors is awesome. Okay. Now, you can see Khartia here is really been the lead of this operation. And the 57th, by the way, was also a part of this operation, one of the units there. And this Russian breakthrough reportedly now has been fully contained in Kupiansk. All ground access for Russian forces have been cut, and every strategic exit and position is now under Ukrainian fire control. Right now, it's important to note that it's very hard to get direct fire control in this kind of war. But you can see fire control means drone control. But here's the key takeaway. This is from actually about 2 weeks ago. And Russia said, listen, we've captured Kupiansk in the Donbas ahead of a Kremlin meeting with the U.S. envoy. This is important, right? Because not only did the Russians really want to symbolically make this victory, but they wanted to literally be able to sit down with the U.S. forces and say, look, we're winning. We've taken this big city. And the problem is, of course, that the reality gets a vote. And the issue is that Russians say it, and oftentimes American negotiators just take Russian statements at face value. It's actually preposterous how frequently Russian statements are just simply taken as absolutely true. If I read it on Twitter, it must be true, which is insane. But the U.S. negotiators, like, this really makes a difference for them. Because normally, right, normally a U.S. negotiator, if Russia was to make this claim, CIA, for example, would do some insider work, dig through probably signal intelligence, and be like, hey, the Russians are full of it. We can see their troops' radio and cell signals are triangulated. They're not in control of the whole city. They're just lying. And normal U.S. diplomats would say, hey, Russia, you're obviously lying to us, that you're not winning. And it's like reeks of insecurity. It's a sign that you're not winning when you have to lie about your victories, right? Because again, if you were really winning, your victories would speak for themselves, right? So this has been a good news for the Ukrainians, a reminder by Ukraine that Russia is fragile in a lot of ways, vulnerable in a lot more, and ultimately not pursuing a strategy that is winning, and that the Ukrainian military, whatever challenges it's experiencing, is nowhere near the total collapse that oftentimes you would think if you followed only the tweets of U.S. officials. All right, guys. Thank you. Awesome. Jayhawk, thanks for the $2. Trump is Putin's, and I'll get demonetized if I read that. But I appreciate the sentiment, and I don't think you're wrong. I don't think you're wrong. Also, I saw a Gear, Geir S73, becoming joining the specialist tier. Dope. Yeah, specialist tier, I think, is the minimum tier to get you access to the combat venue stuff. So we'll make sure to get you that. Yeah, I see you guys talking about, like, yeah. X is 100% a propaganda channel. It's social media. It's trash. And you shouldn't believe anything you read on it. But the problem is that huge portions of the senior people in the U.S. government really believe the things they read on X ahead of things like the CIA, right? We're talking about, in the State Department. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollar operations being disregarded in exchange for a very easily influenceable platform. Something that the platform itself, when they did that location tracking, the platform itself found that that there was tons of accounts that were just masquerading, right? Accounts that were like MAGA cowboy was based in India. You'd have like Trump 2028 based in Serbia. Like, there was all that shit. Mr. Badges, we don't hear much about the story of booby traps in the war. Is it overshadowed by dominant drone warfare story? Yeah. So but the answer is the booby traps absolutely continue. Particularly in areas where, some of them are mines. Some of them, there's a non-trivial amount of actually homemade mines placed in areas where, again, they think that Ukrainian forces might come in. Yeah. So it's a lot of that. You definitely hear it on both sides. I think the Russians more than the Ukrainians, in part because the Russians kind of need it. They may not have as many conventional resources. But yeah, it's just overshadowed by drones, right? Like, but it doesn't mean they're not essential, or not important. Yeah, somebody points out there's things like Blue Sky and Threads that are Twitter alternatives. Shout out to Christopher. I only used X once when I was trolling Elon and he blocked me. That's a good use of it. It's like, why are we 14 minutes in the video before content begins? Dude, because it's a live stream. Story, this is a live stream. I'm literally live. I'm reading your chats. So, dude, we hung out. We talked. The live stream. It's all over it. Elon is not an Indian, but he's also not an American. He masquerades as an American, but he's a South African. I know he got naturalized, but he himself believes that that naturalized citizens have no place in the United States. So seeing the number of people, like Trump himself is like, he wants to revoke birthright citizenship. He definitely doesn't want to see any more naturalized citizens. And Elon is one of them. And so the fact that he continues to glaze Elon, despite literally having a position that Elon shouldn't be a citizen, is insane. Murphy got back from civil affairs selection. Okay, well, I hope you got selected, man. Civil affairs is a very important, very robust field. I worked with some civil affairs teams in when I was deployed. They were generally very smart guys. There were a couple where I was like, you're kind of a doofus, but especially in the enlisted side, those guys were like top notch. They were great, so smart. Yeah, Mike. Okay, this is a really interesting story that actually I want to do a whole video on about the poly market betting thing. Because it's absurd in so many ways. That's really got to be its own video. Targus, thanks to the 5. How likely do you think war with Russia will be with NATO or the U.S. in the next 5 years? Could it go nuclear? Short answer is no. Because nuclear weapons, countries have them as defensive mechanisms against existential threats. You notice that Putin, and existential meaning existential to the regime. Putin has, for example, he makes a lot of statements about nuclear forces, but a good example would be, Putin, for example, when the U.S. did something like authorized cluster munitions. Putin said, Russian nuclear forces are at their maximum level of readiness. But what I think is important about that is that nuclear forces around the clock, basically since about the 1960s, have been in a constant state of maximal readiness. That is how mutually assured destruction works. Any minute, day or night, the U.S. and Soviet, later Russian forces are ready to launch on command with like less than an hour's notice. And that is intrinsic to mutually assured destruction. It has always been true. It reflects no change in policy. So therefore it's like if I were to be like, I'm ready to use lethal force to defend my family. Like, that's not a threat. That's always the case. Right? Like, that's just being a dad, right? Like, you're just like, yo, protecting my family is my job. And so you say it to like sound like a threat, but it's actually something that's just persistently true. So yeah, I don't think there's a high likelihood of nuclear warfare. The fear would be if there was a conflict in which, so a country like Poland or a country like Estonia was to go, hey, we're about to lose our capital city to the Russians, and we are requesting protection from the U.S. nuclear umbrella. And that is something that could result in potentially a nuclear strike, but the odds are pretty slim. And the reason I say that is because Baltics, there would be a scenario that might be more effective at NATO countries using conventional means to push the Russians out. Because, like, if you're Estonia, even if 50% of your country is captured by Russia, you still don't want a nuclear weapon to get dropped on that occupied parts of the country. It's going to create a radioactive no-go zone. It's going to turn it into Stalker. And so they have to say, okay, a conventional fight is just makes more sense, right? It's going to leave something worth preserving. right? It's almost like people thought nuclear weapons would end war, but nuclear weapons are so effective and so undiscriminatory that they are almost too effective for anything other than total war absolute survival. It's like the cost of a nuclear weapon, right? Because you're going to get nuked back, is so great that it has to be defending something that is worth nuclear exchange. And that answer is that there's actually not that many things that meet that category, right? Like would you see 100 million Americans killed? What would be worth protecting, right? Presumably 100 million and one Americans is worth 100 million dead Americans. But you see what I mean? Like, there's not a lot, right? Preserving Estonian territory, that is better done with conventional weapons, right? So, anyway. Yeah, people talk about Finland's bunkers. Yeah, we'll see. I'm skeptical. Okay, you guys want to talk about the other story? Yeah, no problem. Thanks for the super chat, Targus. Let me just see. Make sure I didn't miss anybody else. Nope. Thanks, guys. Okay, you guys want to cover the next story? Yeah, let's do it. Is Ukraine starting to roll out discussions of a buffer zone with Russia? Just what exactly is the potential peace deal that, rumor has it, the U.S. and Kiev are ready to sign on to? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so this is a wild kind of story because Ukraine is going out and denying that there is discussions of what they call a Donbas buffer zone deal, calling the talks theoretical, right? And this is fascinating because, yeah, any deal is theoretical until it's inked. But this is the presidential office denied the reports that they are exploring a Donbas buffer zone. But they literally then confirmed it by saying the discussions are theoretical. So are there discussions of a Donbas buffer zone? Yes. Wild. But what exactly does this mean? This is a report from France's Le Monde newspaper claiming Kiev had agreed in principle to a demilitarized zone on both sides of the current Donbas front line, allegedly backed by European leaders and included in a revised U.S. peace plan. Now, the French outlet reportedly overstated what were currently theoretical discussions. In any negotiation process, all formats are discussed, including potentially stopping along the line of contact. This is interesting for a couple of reasons. The first is that the Europeans actually, in their counterproposal to the United States, explicitly said, hey, we want land swap negotiations to start at the line of contact, right? And as we've talked about, there is no actual line of contact. It's more of like a gray zone. But the discussion included a monitored buffer or demilitarized zone. But Ukraine itself said, listen, we need some other things. More importantly, we need a security guarantee, right? Now, this is all a sort of theoretical framework. Kiev was like, we want a demilitarized zone requiring the withdrawal of troops from both sides of the front line. And this is very weird. This has some problems baked right into it. And we're going to talk about exactly what those problems are. But I want to mention first two things. The first is it's the holidays, guys. And if you're like me, you are really busy, okay? I have a 2-year-old and a 6-month-old. Like, I'm busy. And that's why I rely on the caffeine hit of Strike Gum. That's right. Each piece of Strike Gum has an energy drink's worth of caffeine, right? 90 milligrams. That's as much caffeine as this thing. So if you're looking for either a gift for your local caffeine junkie, right? And you should pick some up or pick some up for yourself so you can make it. But more importantly, if you guys want to give a gift, a tax deductible, right? Gift to the Ukrainians on the front line fighting every day, check the link in the description. Check out our partnership with UAO. We are raising money for units fighting in all directions. Kharkiv, Kramatorsk, Vovchansk, Kupiansk, in fact, all these guys, including the 54th, literally just took place, just fought in the liberation of Kupiansk. And so if you want to help these guys out, get them what they need today, right? Particularly thermal drones, ground drones, power stations, but also help their R&D labs develop the next generation of combat gear, right? They've got some modifications to their ground drones that just need a couple of parts, and we're trying to get them hooked up. You can donate, and of course, these guys will hook you up with patches. $400 will get you a patch from the 7th and the 54th, but there's even more than that. Thanks to guys like Alexander, Francois, Mike, all putting up, Evandro, all from all over the world, stepping up to help these guys out. You guys are awesome. Now, here's what I wanted to talk about, and that is the Russian stance. And the Russians are doing classic Russian bullshit, right? Because Putin's aide signals that, yeah, we could withdraw troops from the Donbass as long as our National Guard remains. And police. This is stupid because the Russian National Guard, their Ministry of Interior, Rosguardia, is a militant arm. It's like the American National Guard, right? And if we were to say, oh, well, we're going to withdraw our army from somewhere, but we're going to leave our National Guard, that's preposterous. You might recall that in 2006, the entire Iraq war was fought by National Guard and reserve troops. And so this idea that the Russian National Guard is somehow not going to be a military force is preposterous. And Kremlin aide Yuri Yushankov said the Donbass will sooner or later come under full Russian control, whether through negotiations or military means. He said a ceasefire, he added, could only occur after Ukrainian forces leave the area. Right? He said, quote, there will be the National Guard, our police, everything necessary to maintain order and organize daily life. Of course, guys, as you know, in the United States and in Russia in general, the National Guard not typically required to maintain order. But I think this itself is really telling about the Russian thinking here. And that is that the Russians should not be taken seriously, right? Deploying their National Guard is not the same thing as a demilitarized zone. Imagine if the U.S. National Guard was to march into the Korean DMZ and say, well, we're not soldiers, we're National Guard members. It's totally fine that we're here, right? It's obviously preposterous, and the North Koreans would never buy into it, right? So the fact that the Russians are already explaining how they're going to try to loophole their way out of the deal is not an accident, right? They're publicly doing it so that the Ukrainians balk at it. They go, this is obviously a trick. And the Russians know that the Americans are going to take them seriously, and that the Americans are not going to view it as a problem because, one, repeatedly, U.S. negotiators have shown that they have very little understanding that things are different in Russia. They don't even appear to understand in some cases that Russia isn't a democracy. And the fact that Russia will say, well, we want our National Guard in these cities, just like you Americans have your National Guard in the cities, not realizing that they are subject to a completely different legal regime. And they know that the Ukrainians balking at it, calling it out for the obvious deception that it is just going to make the Americans mad. And so the problem, there's actually even deeper problems with this. For example, Zelenskyy said that Ukrainians may actually have to vote, right? There may be a popular vote in elections or a referendum to decide to cede land to Russia. This is a extremely, extremely challenging notion because it's banned by Ukraine's constitution, right? This is, again, think about the American Civil War, in which some U.S. states said, hey, we entered this compact voluntarily. We're going to leave voluntarily. And the U.S. was basically like, no, dude, there's no mechanism in the Constitution for you to leave. You can't. And we fought a civil war over it. And that's the same thing the Ukrainians are right now saying. Listen, you can't just cleave off part of Ukraine because you don't like them. And it makes a lot of sense, right? Because imagine a world, for example, where one Ukrainian region voted for politicians the other ones didn't like. And they said, well, you know what? The majority voted and you're officially kicked out of Ukraine, right? You can't run a country that way. And so that's why it requires literally rewriting Ukraine's constitution to achieve that. Now, how are you even going to put it to vote for Ukrainian people to give parts of their country to an occupier when those people in those regions don't get to vote. Think about it. Like, imagine you're in Mariupol or a Donetsk city, and everybody but your city votes to kick you out of Ukraine. You'd go, hey, what happened, guys? Right? So you see how there's these fundamental problems that run up against the notion of democracy itself, right? And a demilitarized buffer zone, as we know, or a fake demilitarized buffer zone, is not in and of itself that helpful as a choice. But the fact is that if it were part of security guarantees, really robust security guarantees, like if, for example, on the Ukrainian side of the buffer zone, large numbers of European and American troops were deployed, Ukraine would probably be open to that, right? Ukraine would probably say, listen, we're willing to formally or informally not try to retake our territory if it meant that British, American, French troops had skin in the game against further Russian aggression. That would be something I think Zelenskyy would be open to. The problem is, of course, that Russia has laid out explicitly. They want to tell NATO, they want to get a veto power, instructing NATO never to expand, therefore having NATO, in effect, tell all sovereign nations around Russia that they are now Russian vassal states, and that there is no scenario where they will receive any external security assistance. Russia has also said they don't want to see a democratically elected Ukrainian government. They want to have a veto power over Ukrainian political parties, i.e. to ban every party they deem too Nazi. But remember, Zelenskyy's political party, the one headed by a Jewish Ukrainian man, that one is also considered too Nazi for Russia's taste. So you can see how, like, the Russian conditions are so much more than this. And Russia has said, we want no NATO troops inside Ukraine. All of this is part of this this Russian strategy to vassalize the entire state of Ukraine, to turn it into a subordinate state like Belarus. And that is what's really being negotiated here, right? It's not about the Donbas per se. Because again, the US or the Ukrainians haven't controlled the Donbas in years. This is about giving Putin the ability to leverage Ukraine into a subordinate state. Again, imagine like it'd be like a tiny Caribbean nation. How much could it really meaningfully resist coercion by the United States? The answer is it really can't if the U.S. wanted to coerce it into doing something, because it's small, economically impoverished, and completely dependent on the U.S. for essentially all of its goods and services. And so that is what Ukraine wants to avoid becoming, right? Again, it doesn't want to become a Belarus, doesn't want to become a Transnistria, an Abkhazia, right? These states that are essentially colonial outposts of Russia, that Russia extracts for resources and props up corrupt governments, right? Ukraine's been that, and it does not want it, and it's made that eminently clear. All right, wow. Okay, guys, I saw a bunch of super chats. Let me give you guys, whoa. Marco, thanks for the €2. USA of 2025 doesn't even know that the US is a democracy. That's true. Or they hate it a lot. They really can't stand that we keep letting everybody vote, you know. Oh, universal suffrage. Robert Johnson says, looks to me like Trump has been bought and paid for a long time. What do you say? Yeah, I think that's how it works. Trump is very clearly he's a real estate guy. And he understands that in real estate and in a lot of these kind of industries, particularly in places like New York, there's this thing where someone does you a favor, and you don't have to like have a written contract that says I help you, then you help me in this way. Trump just understands the Russians worked really hard to get him elected, and he owes the Russians a favor. And the Russians told him explicitly, hey, we have our eye on Ukraine. Trump has said that. He said, listen, the first term, Ukraine was the apple of Putin's eye. And so, yeah, Trump understands that he cannot, under any circumstances, have a combative relationship to Russia, particularly because Russia's made clear that for people like Witkoff, Jared Kushner, Trump's kids and Trump family, Russia's going to transfer a lot of money to them, and probably already has, I suspect, through the Trump cryptocurrency. Robert Johnson, thanks to the other 5. And thank you to Mr. Badges. To me, observing the state of the Russian Navy, Army, Air Force, the condition of Russian nuclear arsenal is highly questionable. That's true, but remember, the problem with nuclear weapons is that, let's say only 50% of Russian nuclear weapons function. That's still hundreds, dozens at least, of weapons, and each one of them has multiple warheads. I mean, even a single strike on the U.S., on a U.S. city would be devastating, or a European city would be just devastating. They're like, Europe is not our problem 3,000 miles away. Well, I think that's probably not true, given how much trade happens to and from Europe, between Europe and the United States. Europe as a bloc is the 3rd largest economic bloc in the world, and it is the one that is the staunchest U.S. ally, right? So if you want to have an economic and military unit capable of defeating and deterring China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, the U.S. alone is insufficiently sized to do so. And so it needs an ally, an economic and military ally, and the EU is the one most likely to be willing to do such a thing. Obviously, the U.S., China's not going to, and Russia's not going to. So again, if you want to, let's say, sanction China for aggression, or block Chinese companies or Chinese actors from infiltrating, markets. So Europeans are always begging us to fight their wars. Well, actually, Eric, fun fact, European forces deployed to support the U.S. operation in Afghanistan for 20 years. The U.S. also asked European countries to fight in Iraq, and the U.K. and Poland and several other countries did just that. So in the last 20 years, Europeans have been the ones who have been asked by the Americans to fight their wars. It's a good guess, though. And by the way, at no point has the Europeans actually asked the U.S. forces to deploy and fight in support of Ukraine. All they've asked us to do is to sell the Ukrainians weapons, which if you want to know if that's the same thing as fighting a war, ask a soldier. I can tell you that giving the Iraqi army weapons is not the same thing as deploying to the Iraq war, okay? And if you're like, it's too expensive, this is where I point out that during the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, the U.S. spent about 4% of its GDP on defense spending, and that now that those wars ended, that number has actually fallen to 3.5%, and that's including the Ukraine aid. So we're actually aiding Ukraine is still substantially cheaper, to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, or half a percentage of U.S. GDP. It's so much cheaper. We are not even close to spending at the level we did in Iraq and Afghanistan, and that's nothing. Those numbers, 4.5%, is nothing compared to what we spent during the Cold War, right? And so in some ways, this support of Ukraine, if you tell me that there is a 10% chance that it diminishes the likelihood of a future Cold War, then it is a worthwhile investment, because in order to win the Cold War, the U.S. had to spend between 6, 7, 8% of its GDP on defense. So imagine, again, doubling the defense budget and you as the taxpayer having to pay that. So again, even if you think that there is a 50-50 chance that it reduces the likelihood of a full-blown Cold War in the future, it's an absolutely worthwhile investment. Oh, yeah, that's a good point. John Cromwell, 4,000 Ukrainian soldiers fought in the U.S. wars after 9/11. Of course, also, in fact, Georgian soldiers were deployed in Iraq when Russia invaded Georgia, and the U.S. just let it happen. And that permanently really damaged Georgian-U.S. relations, because Georgia was like, yo, you guys took our best combat troops and pulled them into your pointless war in Iraq, where Georgia doesn't really have a big stake. And then Russia invaded our country. Ukraine lost 70 soldiers fighting alongside the U.S. after 9/11. Somebody's like, I think 100 billion is worth 17 people. I do. I don't. 100 billion is worth 17 people. Yeah, that's not the case. It's refuting a different point. Yeah, only one country's ever revoked NATO Article 5, and that's the US of A. NATO showed up for us. So, you know, if you were NATO, you'd be pretty pissed. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Let me make sure give you lads, the Combat Venues Alpha Chads, shout out they deserve. God, where's all my stuff? I just close the chat. Oh, there you go. Thanks, chat. Okay, there you are. I see you, chat. Oh my god. Okay, you have no idea how many different crazy interfaces I have on here. Huge thank you, of course, to our Colonel tier members, the guys like Alfred Chesky, Alan Knudsen, Christine Schumann, Dan M, Deborah Oppenheimer, and all of our Lieutenant tier members. We couldn't do it without you guys. I appreciate you so much. And become a member yourselves. You can do so on YouTube with that big old membership button, or just go into combatvetnews.com. Okay. Awesome. What on earth? Okay. There we go. Nice. Well, guys, thank you so much for tuning in, man. I'm really pleased, that we had almost 800, almost 600 of you guys coming in, hanging out. I really enjoy this. Would you guys, let me see if I can do this. I want to take a poll real quick before we get out of here. Let me see. Can I do a poll? Let your viewers weigh in. Okay. Ask a question. Can I ask a user option? Okay. Let's see. Okay. What game would you want to see me stream? Okay. I'd love to do... I'm just going to list some. Okay. All right, here you go. This is... Okay, there we go. If I was to do some live streaming, what would you guys want to see? No, Paul only pays attention to YouTube chat. I can literally see that there is one dude in Twitch chat. I am for Bet and Zolanis. Zolanis, I see you, bro. I appreciate you. Other name in chat, people like Path of Exiles, Ready or Not, Stalker, Battlefield 6, some Arma game. That's funny. Arma was one of the things. Wait, I want to see. Oh, interesting. Okay, Arc Raiders, just as oh, you're right. ETF is a Russian game. Oh, okay. Hearts of Iron. Yeah, dude. No, dude. I'm not. That's going to take me like 8 to 12 hours to do. I want you to build a battle station and play Star Citizen. Yikes. Okay, well, I'm interested in that Liftoff and Arc Raiders. Yeah, Fallout. Interesting. Okay. Okay, well, also fascinating. There's only 58 votes. So weigh in. We're gonna close it soon. But if there's less than 100, it's almost impossible to really like narrow it down, because it's like the what's the word I want? Margin error is too great if you got less than 100, you know? The fact you didn't know about Tarkov ruined your future as a gaming streamer. Raise money for Ukraine or get a real job. Okay, that's really funny because clearly you just accidentally outed yourself as not having as having just rolled into the stream. And now honestly just rolled into the channel, dude. Like, congrats. Exactly. Effect, sample size, no statistical power. At least 100. I mean, honestly, if it's less than 200, you're still wasting your time. But I'm surprised. I'm surprised there's not an overwhelming favorite, actually. But that itself is good. It means that there's diversity of interest and then I could play different games. All right, I'm going to call it there. I got to like do some editing and do some other stuff. And people are like, you're triggered. Dude, have you ever seen a streamer? Hello. Yeah, 200. 200 is about the number for like meaningful statistical significance. Oh yeah, there's always salty Russians in the chat. I love it. I love it. The saltier, the better. Okay. All right, I'm going to get out of here. Okay, interesting. Other than Arc Raiders and Liftoff FPV Drone and Tarkov, one of the least. Obviously, the people that didn't know Tarkov was a Russian game are probably regretting their choice. I'm man enough for Clash Royale. I am not. Okay. Anyway, guys, thank you so much.